And we are live. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mathieu Roche. I am the CEO and co-founder of ID5. Welcome to the second episode of the Laptop Side Chat webcast. It's a mouthful. I can't say that. We need to find another name. I'm super excited today because we're having not one, but two Exchange Wire AdTech Personalities of the Year. Cadi Joens, the commercial director of Beeswax, is with us. Hello, Cadi.
Hi.
And Paul Gubbins, who should have a permanent title of AdTech Personality of the Year. Hi, Paul. So we have a lot of people who've registered. About half of the registered have signed up to the webcast so far, have connected. So we're going to wait a few more minutes, and then we're going to get started. Few housekeeping details. You have a chat panel on the right-hand side of your screen. If you want to send us questions, we'd be more than happy to interact with you guys in real time. The webcast is planned to last about 45 minutes, so roughly until 3:45 in the UK. Cadi and Paul are joining us from their confined residence in London. Not the same one, by the way, separately, right? Unless I didn't know something. No? Okay, good. I think you're on mute, Paul, actually. So top right.
We're actually even at opposite corners of London, I think. I live northeast, and I think, Paul, you live sort of southwest.
Yeah, nope, still not working, Paul. It was working 2 minutes ago. What'd you do? Nope.
This is a first, isn't it?
Nope, still not. It shows like you're. Oh, I've got a button to eject a presenter. That's pretty awesome.
It's like being like you're flying a private jet. You can just push us out.
That's it.
Eject button.
Nope, we still cannot hear you. Do you want to log back in? Yeah. Okay, that will give us time to let the few remaining people to join. So we have a very interesting. Ask him to rejoin. Absolutely, thank you, Val. So we have an interesting list of attendees, people from all over the industry. A lot of people from the UK, but we have some international attendees as well. Paul Gubbins has joined the room. Right, your video and my audio.
Yeah, better.
There you go. Welcome back. Welcome back. Okay. Well, I think we're almost at capacity, so let's get started. As I said, super excited to have you guys on the line. The format of this webcast is like a pretty much informal discussion. I would like to touch on a few subjects, and I think obviously, because of the situation, we have to talk about the times we're going through. Happy to see that you are both safe and healthy and doing well. I hope it's the same for your loved one and your teams. First off, maybe Cadi, starting with you. What's your what impact have you seen? We've been in this for about a month now, right? Have you what have you seen? What's the impact? There was a few an event I think last week with Ari Paparo, your CEO, saying that Europe had been pretty kind of harsh in its response to the crisis early on. So I guess from your perspective, what can you share with us? What can you tell us about how coronavirus has impacted your business so far?
Yes, I mean, Ari ran a webcast last week with a couple of eminent panelists talking about the impact of this situation on AdTech businesses as a whole. And I think the situation has impacted Europe before it's impacted the States just in terms of the spread of the virus. And so I think what Ari was just alluding to was we've had to deal with things perhaps before the States had, where they are really only just now beginning to see the consequences. Whereas for us, we have countries like Italy and Spain who are very, very, I'm very glad that they're starting to see now the flattening of the curve for them. In terms of our business impact, it's certainly true that countries where the virus has hit more strongly and more rapidly, we have seen significant disruption. So particularly in Spain and Italy, there's been certainly some customers who've had some real difficulties and are still having a very tough time. But we've also seen some customers who are having a very positive impact on their business. I think while there are many sectors who are impacted very negatively, AdColony put out some stats last night for the month of March, showing, should point out, not a customer, but someone who we work with actively. We access a lot of their mobile supply, and they said mobile gaming as a sector has been up 24% last month. And so I think where we do have customers in that sort of space, there are actually more people accessing their services, and so it's been a real mix. And I think above all else, we're mostly focused on the human side of things, so looking after our customers and our teams to make sure that we're there for them however we can support them, and that's one of the big advantages that we have as independent ad tech. We do have that human relationship where our customers are not, we're picking up the phone to them. They're not submitting a ticket and waiting in a queue to be able to speak to me or Ari or any of our team.
Yeah, and I think that's also something we've seen, right? It's like being close to your clients, being just showing that you care, not only from a business standpoint, but just from a human standpoint. Even, in all circles, right? Even with your family and your friends and everything, it's really changed the way we interact with each other. I think that's an interesting comment that you make, right? Some sectors, some verticals, some industries have been affected differently than others. Obviously, there's a surge of traffic on news websites. There's a surge of usage of things like online gaming. I think gambling, like not gambling, but like a poker. I don't know about you guys, but I'm invited into 3 different kind of poker tournaments this week.
I'm terrible at poker as well. This is awful.
So am I. I'm just losing money, but it goes to charity, so it's also a good cause. But I think so. It's interesting to see how kind of that, because very often the money isn't necessarily coming in from the industry, like the verticals. Do you think do you think that because things going to slow down during the month of March, we're going to see the real dip in April, or is it going to be like gradually a gradual evolution? Is this something like 1st of April, like campaigns were supposed to be renewed are not going to renew, or do you think the trend that we've seen over the past 2 weeks, and we've heard things like maybe 20-30% drop, which is important, but it's not like zero. Do you think that's more or less what we're going to see going forward?
I think it's very, very hard to forecast, and I think it depends whether you're looking country by country or across the whole region, because I think the timing is
very different as well, right? Yeah,
it really is, and I think there are some countries in Europe where they're already talking about loosening the lockdown in the next week or so, whereas here in London, we're only just, a couple of weeks into our official government lockdown. And so it's, I don't think there's one hard and fast rule. I think there's also a big difference, as you say, by vertical. So we're seeing, I know in our pre-call, we talked a little bit about contextual targeting and brands potentially blocking coronavirus and COVID-related terms on the open internet. But we're actually seeing our customers wanting to invest and support quality journalism. And so they are setting up PMPs and transacting with premium press to support them. And I think that's a really, really interesting trend that I'm really pleased to see. And so I think I don't think there's a single hard and fast rule.
Yeah. Paul, you have a unique perspective. You've been acting as a consultant for a lot of ad tech companies, and how is that? I mean, you have a very kind of good point of view on how the industry is evolving. What's your take on this situation? What do you hear?
Well, looking at the different reports this week, I think it's careful not to be too negative, right? Some of these spend reports can read a little bit like a Stephen King novel, but there are positive data points in there to kind of focus on. The IEB this week put out a really good survey from their buy-side members, looking at what they're doing around ad spend currently, but also for the rest of the year. And some important stats there that I just kind of jotted down earlier. Buyers expect to be in a position to ramp up spends from May and June. 67% from a H2 perspective still sit on the fence. They don't know what they're going to be doing, but they are ready to deploy those budgets quickly and aggressively if the market dictates are unable to do that. Also, back to your point earlier, Cadi, I think from a premium news perspective, Comscore put out some stats earlier this week, which were really powerful and really positive. 6 months ago, many of us in the industry were worried about consumers getting their news from social aggregated feeds, and we were worried about premium news publishers hemorrhaging users to the social networks. But the figures that Comscore have published, I think it's France 68% up, Germany 57% up, Italy 125% up. We know why there. Spain 87% up, UK 51% up. So I think
it's traffic for news publishers, right? Traffic for premium publishers,
publishers. So I think it's a positive, because again, if the publishers can harness that new and invigorated relationship with their consumer, that's an opportunity for them in these current difficult climates that they're facing.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I was reading an article earlier as well saying that the social is seen as a fear feed, right? Because it's only like first you don't know if the information is relevant or if it's a hoax or whatever.
Yeah.
Plus it's only the negative, and sometimes people want something that they can trust, and B, something that takes them out of the doom and gloom element that's of things that are circulating on social media.
Absolutely.
But I think that trusted information source is probably the most key thing in a time of huge uncertainty. You know, no one wants to be unwittingly spreading fake news or misinformation, and so I think that's where, you know, people really are turning to quality journalism.
But it's also important, though, right, that we as an industry and everybody on the call and all of the advertising agencies and brands understand the enormity of what those publishers are doing. Newsworks today put out a very powerful open letter to the advertising community explaining why it's so important to support premium journalism. You know, for some context, they illustrated that if the pandemic was to last for another 3 months, that could eventually cost these publishers up to 50 million. That's a huge amount of money that many of these guys don't have at the moment. So it's a question of, when you're looking at your holistic block lists, when you're applying, you know, data to your programmatic buys, it's looking and really understanding why some publishers and keywords may be blocked, and asking yourself what the value of that is to your campaign, and whether the end user would actually think there's any negative connotations with your brand appearing in informed journalism. You know, statistics show there isn't actually a negative connotation.
Yeah. So let's talk about how you've adapted. I mean, everyone working from home. I guess in our industry, it's probably simpler to do than in most others. How complicated was it for you and your team, Cadi, to set up a work from home policy, and what are you doing on a daily basis? Like, do you talk to your team every day? Do you have like weekly stand-ups? Do you do happy hours? What's been the reaction and the evolution of your approach to?
I think we're pretty fortunate to work in a really, really digital first business, right? So I think for us it was very easy to switch to working from home. I think quite a few of our team had already switched to working from home before it became the recommended setup. We gave everyone the option to do that as soon as the situation became apparent, and so I think
it's been in place for you guys for like a few weeks now, 3-4 weeks, maybe 2 weeks, 3 weeks.
We've been able to work from home as requested, I think, for something like 5 weeks if we've wanted to permanently. But I myself have been at home for, yes, three and a bit weeks now. I think slightly stir crazy, but in terms of how we manage it, we have a daily stand up just for our EMEA team, where we really briefly check in with each other. We share what we achieved yesterday, our number one priority for the day ahead, and then anything that we're stuck on or puzzling on, and that's quite good, as it does get people interacting with each other. We always end up with a lot of sort of parking lot questions that people can take, I was going to say take offline, but they're take on separate online
there's no
chat.
anymore. There's no offline anymore.
Exactly. Yeah. And so that's working really well. And then in the afternoon we have a tea break session where optional, entirely optional, where we can dial in. People can show off their baking. We've been playing various games with Spot the Difference, a game called Code Names. So just having a sort of 15-20 minute break together, because we're used to having these big, nice social conversations in the office, and it's quite, some people, not everyone has a people that they live with, and I think if you're living on your own, it's important to have that social element of interaction. And then within the US team as well, so with our headquarters in New York, we've had regular conversations with them, both sort of maintaining our weekly all hands that Ari leads for the team, but also adding in pub quizzes, or they call them something different in America, but basically a pub quiz, trivia night, and various happy hours and things like that. So we've got a nice, probably even more interaction than we would normally have with our colleagues over the pond.
Yeah, interesting. I think it's similar situation for us, because we have some of our team are already remote. I think the biggest challenge has been to find the right, I guess, level of comfort. Some people are working from their bedroom, some are working from their kitchen, like on the the living room table and stuff. So it's getting into a rhythm, getting into a habit of having like a proper space. Also, like roommates and kids and everything is really adapting to that, right? But to some extent, it might, some of those kind of working times are actually more efficient, because there's a lot less disruptions and everything. Paul, question for you on in terms of like as a consultant, right? So again, you've had to adapt to that situation. I'm guessing a lot of the missions that you had in the past might not be relevant anymore.
Yeah.
How is that? Where do you see see interest for the space, and how has it evolved?
The working from home element hasn't really changed. There are lots of projects that are underway from my kitchen table at the moment. But I think the tone and narrative for the conversation has changed massively. So 3 or 4 weeks ago, a lot of the projects that I was engaged with were around supply path optimization. It was companies looking to move into video header bidding, or what did unified auctions mean for CTV inventory. A lot of those conversations are now completely on hold. And the types of people that I'm speaking to has changed massively as well. So it's gone from ad tech vendors, agencies and publishers, more towards now private equity companies and VCs, trying to establish whether or not what their boards have told them is actually accurate. So what is the real impact of this to their investments? But increasingly, it's PE firms trying to figure out if there's any undervalued assets due to the current climate, and whether or not there's opportunities to get into ad tech and martech. So it's quite interesting, actually. The conversations are still happening, but because of the current pandemic, it's been a real shift in direction.
That's interesting. There was a podcast. I don't know if anyone has had a chance to listen to it. Ad Exchanger does a podcast called something about social distancing.
Yeah, they do one every day. It's pretty good, actually.
Yeah. And they had it's a short one. It's 30 minutes, and they had someone who doesn't speak very often in public, someone called Eric Franchi, who's the operating partner at Math Capital. Last week, and he was talking about how the situation has shifted their focus from like new deals and new discussion with new companies into supporting portfolio companies massively. Which is the focus, I guess, for everyone who's invested, is to make sure their investment can
I listened to it, and the bit that I took away from that was where he said all of the CEOs that they've invested in and their companies, many of them have been through the startup and the exit process before, but this is the first time any of them have seen a pandemic like this. So small things like setting up Slack groups where each of the CEOs can share information, because they're all trying to get the same information from the governments, from the World Health Organization. It kind of resonated, and it's quite a smart thing to do.
Yeah, I agree. It's been super useful, and I think it's interesting to see that, because very often VCs and PE investors have a bad name, and here you can see that they are really resources.
Yeah.
Certainly in our relationship with our investors, they've been like really backing us up and helping out, and sending us like insights about like, hey, I've heard another portfolio company doing this. You should maybe look into that. Yeah, that's been really,
I think they're acutely aware as well, Matt, that these companies aren't underperforming because they're over leveraged in one particular vertical. That often happens in ad tech, where you have one or two customers that make up 90% of your revenues, and something happens with those one or two customers. They either get acquired, or there's a change in ownership, or they don't perform as well as they do, and the ad tech company is massively overexposed. But the PE guys are realizing now that there is nothing that many in ad martech could have done to weather this kind of turbulence. It's not about being overexposed in one vertical. It's every single vertical, other than a few exceptions like gaming, etc., but predominantly are facing the same challenges. So when the valuation is down on these companies, or they're perceived to be doing worse off than they were 6 months ago, it's not a result of them having bad products, bad teams, and bad offerings. It's a predicament and output of the current climate they're in. And there's a lot of opportunity for smart investors at the moment to get behind some of these companies that are building good products.
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting as well to look at Beeswax. We've always made the decision to not go too narrow. There are lots of folks who specialize specifically on a single vertical or a single element of our industry, right? Video or native or in-app or gaming and so on, travel, for example. And I think it's something that again, to from a VC perspective, having that diversification does mean you're potentially less exposed than people who really do have a white gloves service for one particular vertical. But but again, I think it's to your point, Paul. Exactly, this pandemic is impacting every single sector, every single vertical, and it's I don't know that the world will be quite the same again.
No, and I think as well, when you look at advertisers pulling spend, it's not that black and white. Lots of advertisers have to change their creative as well, and that isn't something that many of these companies can do in 24 hours. We touched upon this, Matt, before the call kicked off. The relevancy of brands staying prominent throughout a crisis and pandemic like this, and what their perceived value is long term. I think many brands still want to have a dialogue with their customers. It's just a question of making sure they get that tone right, because they know the damage that can be done with the wrong tone of creative. And a creative that was relevant 6 weeks ago is completely irrelevant to their core target audience today. So it's a question of being smart, using the insights that they have and the technology partners they're working with to hone and create new assets that can keep them relevant throughout this period of worry for many of their customers.
Yeah,
but to your point, that's not something you can just do overnight necessarily.
I'm going to share a link of a very interesting post on LinkedIn that was talking about the importance of advertising, obviously about the message, as you said, but also just plain advertising. And I found that post interesting, and I'm sharing it with you guys on the chat room, which, by the way, you can use to ask us questions if you want to, showing data points from historical kind of crisis periods, right? 1929, 1973, 2008, and showing how companies who've kept advertising, who've kept brand awareness high, who've worked on their message, right, to convey value of empathy and kind of service and mission, came out on top of those situations. I mean, one example that I found fascinating was Kellogg's, who was like a challenger in the cereal, breakfast cereal space before, and because they kept and actually invested more in advertising during the 1929 recession became the owner of the space for the rest of the century, basically.
So they were a serial advertiser.
Serial advertiser, yeah. Exactly.
Well, there should be a warning against puns.
And actually, you know what? It's real full today, right? So don't believe anything we say.
No.
All right. Anyway, there was. I mean, the talk of the day before all of those things happened were obviously the end of the cookie and the whole kind of user identification world. I know Ari said last week that he found this a welcome relief.
Yeah, we get to talk about something different for a few weeks.
Exactly. Other than Brexit.
My favorite.
Yeah, no more Brexit, no more cookie apocalypse for a few weeks.
Yeah, there you go. Well, I'd rather us go back to that, right? If it means we're out of that crisis, it'll be a good thing for the world. But anyway, we're still faced with the same perspective of browsers kind of cutting down access to third-party cookie, of regulations also happening. Do we think this is going to have an impact? The COVID-19 crisis going to have an impact on this? For instance, we've seen calls from advertisers through the W3C and to Google and to regulators about, can we pause this? Can we pause CCPA implementation? Yeah. Can we pause Google's evolution of management of third-party cookie? Is there any? We've seen also on the other side increased usage of personal data for things like geolocation of consumers to identify patterns and see how movements of people could help spread or prevent spread of the virus. Are we going to see a different perspective on privacy, identification, identity going forward? Is it going to change this whole discussion, or are we going back to good old cookie discussion in 3 months?
Depending on what you think, Cadi, I don't think it changes anything, unfortunately. I think the government's always been doing smart things with telcos to harness privacy compliant data. That it's just become more apparent now because it's in the news. So that is a separate track as far as I'm concerned. Delays from Google, or the want for them to delay and them saying no, it's business as usual. Safari are pushing on ahead, business as usual. TCF 2.0 has come out of beta today, business as usual. I think, unfortunately for companies, they're going to have to get on board with the new landscape. But the reality is that many of their engineers, product leads, commercial leads are all going to be in disparate locations. And it's going to be very difficult for many of them, not only to fight the fires of revenue, but also to build and innovate when it comes to product and identity solutions. So I think it's just become a lot harder for the existing ecosystem. I don't think anything changes from my perspective.
No, I'm inclined to agree. I think the thing that's interesting, I think, is where there are ops teams at the moment, perhaps with fewer campaigns to set up and worry about. I think that there is an opportunity here for folks to be investing time and energy in what that future looks like. And we're certainly not seeing any slowdown from customers who want to talk to us about, what does a cookie-free future look like, and what does an ID agnostic platform mean for the future of their business. And so I think it's still an area where there isn't going to be a slowdown. To Paul's point, California have refused to grant any delays. We're currently, I was checking to see if we have any updates, but we're currently monitoring, how many V2 strings we're receiving on through TCF.
Yeah. Is it up?
So,
is it?
Yeah, we're all done.
Right?
Yeah. So I think it's, I think that is the new normal now, right? We have to move into this privacy first future and be ready for it. And I think it's I'm excited to see the smart and forward looking customers that we work with building out their readiness to ensure that they have a future in that new world.
We've seen a mix of those two trends, really, as you were saying, Paul. Some of the teams' priorities have been kind of slightly reshuffled. The teams have less availabilities, and so some of the projects that were supposed to go live We have an integration with one of the big SSPs out there, supposed to go live in March. That's been postponed a few weeks just because of the reorganization that's necessary from the teams. And at the same time, we're seeing, I think the volume of IDs, ID5 IDs available in Bitstream has doubled since February because people have had more time to work on like longer term projects. And so there's been a lot of kind of, publishers and platform who've turned things on that they had kind of paused for a while because, they were under daily kind of, urgencies and everything. So it's a mix, really. It's difficult to know if it's going to slow down or accelerate in the next few weeks because you don't really know how companies are adapting and how priorities are changing. So that's a really interesting.
Well, I think there's lots of the conversations that I'm involved in at the moment. There seems to be two schools of thought when it comes to building identity solutions, above and beyond what you guys do, Matt. But it's people-based or it's going to be panel-based. And there seems to be people building features in isolation of each other. Some are backing that it's still going to be one-to-one in a privacy-compliant way. And whatever the ID is that everybody ratifies, that will underpin that one-to-one communication. Others are saying, look, we need to move beyond that. If programmatic is ever going to survive in a privacy-compliant ecosystem, it needs to move beyond one-to-one, and it needs to be panel-based and at the aggregate level. And for me, I don't really know where we net out, but there are lots of people and engineers building for both outcomes.
Yeah. I think it's in the end, it's going to be like the sandbox approach, right? If it's an aggregate approach, right? It's like calculations that are being made at the edge in the browser and made available to vendors. It's difficult to imagine it's going to be as efficient and as kind of customizable and as easy to kind of do things that are different from your competitors using aggregate data sets, right? It's like aggregate versus log level, right? You know that with log level data, you can do a lot more granular things. But it might be like the foundation because it's going to be probably available to everyone. And then on top of that, we're going to be able to build more if and when we have an individual user ID available that's attached to some kind of, probabilistic reconciliation method or maybe deterministic signal when we have logins. And it's kind of defining that hierarchy of method.
No, you're right.
That's going to important.
Yeah, I mean, sorry.
Go on, Cadi.
I was saying we're increasingly seeing brands looking to build out their first-party data and enrich that so they have that better understanding, that better starting point to work from. Because I think while the sandbox will work for some people, I think the changes that Google have made in recent years around what level of user data a customer can get, even when it's a brand's consented first-party data, has been quite frustrating for a number of brands. And so I don't know that everyone is willing to just, nod and smile and go the Google sandbox route.
Well, I think that the challenge the industry has, and I agree with you, Cadi, if people don't have the resources to allocate towards identity because they're fighting the fires of declining revenue, do we find ourselves in a predicament in 2 years' time where people default to the sandbox solution? That then becomes their backbone and their architecture. And we've seen what's happened there previously before with ad servers. Once you're on a particular stack that's fundamental to the core DNA of your business, it becomes very difficult to migrate away from that. So I was listening to Jordan Mitchell from the IB Tech Lab last night do a very good webinar where he was talking about there's a lot of confusion. We aren't building for one identity. We're building for multiple identities, and multiple identities will still exist outside of those confined sandbox environments. But it's a question of which multiple identifiers do we ratify and how do we ratify them so everybody can allocate the same resources to building for the same outcomes.
Oh, that's interesting, because I thought what you were saying before was that you were saying only maybe one of the unified ID solutions would win, whereas I think our view over at Beeswax is, we're already supporting a number of ID solutions, and we can even transact on them. So instead of just relying on transacting on a cookie ID, transacting on a unified ID, on an IP address, on a mobile advertiser ID, we even have some folks transacting on their own first-party IDs. And so for me, it can't be, there isn't one right way of doing it. There has to be flexibility.
But I think if and when the device ID is pulled from the app ecosystem, that is going to give a lot of people another jolt to allocate engineering resources to establishing what that identifier may be. Because Safari, as we know, was the tip of the iceberg. It's still a very large percent of an audience that many brands are trying to reach, but people are now paying attention because Chrome makes up the lion's share of browsing. When the device ID is deprecated, if it is, that is that is going to accelerate this conversation again tenfold.
Yes,
it's been. I mean, we've clearly seen that being a tipping point. We've been pushing that agenda for over 2 years now, and we've seen a tipping point in January when Chrome announced, because until then, it was an important problem for publishers and for brands, but it was only 25% of traffic that couldn't really be used and monetized. While now we're talking about everything. So that's a fundamental redefinition. And I can assure you that no significant ad tech platform out there is considering that the sandbox will be the default. Everyone is actively engaged with people like ID5, LiveRamp, Brightpool, people like that, right? And I think what Project Rearc is kind of putting together at the IAB level is also very important in terms of defining the rules of the game, defining the best practices, defining the requirements, right, for identity to be a sustainable foundation to digital advertising going forward. But I don't believe one second that anyone in the marketplace believes that we can be as well off with the sandbox type solution.
No, I agree with you, Matt. I guess the point I was trying to articulate is if somebody may have started out with the best intentions pre the pandemic to figure out identity within their own organization. However, current circumstances, are they going to be able to do something within that time frame? That's the point I guess I'm trying to get to. Are we going to find more people defaulting to sandbox because there is no alternative for them internally because they've been fighting the revenue fires?
Yeah, understand what you mean. Okay, we've got another 5 minutes or so. I guess I'd like to get your perspective on things. Fast forward a few weeks or a few months. We're going out of this COVID situation. We're probably not going to normal, but at least we're going back to focusing on brands and publishers and how we can help them kind of interact with each other efficiently. What are the things that you're most excited about for the ad tech world, apart from going to Cannes in October, which I know is
It'll be
very,
cold.
very happy. No, it's never cold in Cannes. It's never cold in Cannes. Just take a little cardigan though. So what are you most excited about for the rest of 2020, whenever the rest starts, right? Whether it's Q3, Q4, whatever, but like going forward, what do you think are going to be the trends to be looking at, apart from identity and cookies, which would probably be the silver lining for the rest of the year anyway?
I mean, I think probably the biggest thing has been the rise in mobile adoption. People haven't been out of their houses, so it's not relying on. There's perhaps less cellular data, but I think we're certainly seeing a lot of brands looking at inventory that they perhaps previously considered lower quality. Now thinking actually in-game full in-game video is actually a great way to reach a huge chunk of the population. So I think there's going to be there's definitely some different a rise in maybe adoption of in-app in a way that I think that segment had previously always been very under monetized. Sorry, I just got us started on that. I mean, I know we've talked a lot.
I completely agree. It's often a secondary thought to many buyers. Ordinarily considered for performance-based buyers, etc., But from a branding perspective, I think it's a massively underutilized environment. And to your point, Cadi, the amount of hours that have been spent in-app versus mobile web over the last several weeks are going to be astronomical. And I think many on the buy side will be looking at that landscape to figure out how they extract more upside moving forward from app.
And then I think we talked a lot about the cookie, but I think e-privacy in general I had no idea how many mailing lists I was subscribed to until I've had every single email under the sun from anyone I've ever bought anything from in the last 20 years, messaging me to tell me about updates to their trading terms. So I do think that people, that individual approach to who they share their data with is perhaps something that consumers are going to be looking at in more detail.
From my perspective, out of home, Matt, I think unfortunately it was going like this pre-pandemic.
It's taking a pretty big hit right now, I understand.
Yeah, and it will continue to pick back up again. I think there's a lot of opportunity there, especially when you start to apply data and technology to some of the legacy practices that exist in out of home and increasingly digital out of home. So I think this year we'll see a lot of fantastic innovation in that space.
Yeah, I think so, especially as, once we do get allowed out, I think there'll be a lot of people in the street and a lot of brands really wanting to help celebrate that moment with people.
And there was such a buzz pre everything that was going on about the growth. It's one of the longest standing advertising formats, very traditional, but it was showing a massive uptick versus some of the other traditional outlets. So I think, when you apply programmatic technology, the automation of some of the planning and buying processes, the reconciliation, the reporting, there is a lot of greenfield in that area, I believe.
And Matt, how about you?
Exciting.
Beyond identity, Matt.
Yeah.
Well, I think the identity, cookie, privacy, how do we include consumers in the relationship and in the value exchange with advertising against free content and services? I think that's going to be it's been our focus for the past 2.5 years. It's going to be the focus for another few years going forward, because I think we're really transforming that relationship. We've kind of done our business without really including consumers in the discussion, right? Advertising was there, and it wasn't kind of explained why was advertising there and why we needed their attention. And then I think that fundamentally will change the relationship and the design of the editorial products, right, as products, because you can't just, right now it feels like it's restaurant where whether you pay 10, 20 or 50 pounds, you're eating the same thing. If you log in if you go to a website with Safari, if you go to a website and you don't consent, if you log in and you consent and you use Chrome, right, the value that you provide to the publisher is very different, and yet in most cases you have access to the same content. So I think we have to work on different menus and give access to different types of content, different types of services to consumers based on what value exchange they're ready to support. And that's underpinning, the identity discussion, because identity is the core of kind of the execution of that advertising business model. So yeah, call me monomaniac, but I think it's going to be a very big focus for the industry at large, and certainly for ID5 going forward. And back to your point about the mobile, I think maybe to finish off on a bit of a game, if we were to bet on when the mobile ad ID will be pulled by Google or Safari, whoever fires first, would you say it's a 2020 decision, 2021, 2022, or further ahead? What do you want to bet for? And you can put £10 on the table and talk about that at the end of the year.
Well, you can't come and pick it up if you do.
I'm going to say Q1 next year.
Q1. Oh, and you're even going for a quarterly prediction. That's pretty brave, Paul. Okay. All right.
I'd be surprised if it doesn't come in at the same time as the cookies being removed in Chrome.
So end of 2021, early 2022.
Potentially, for me, it makes most sense for them to coincide the two. Certainly, from the Android Google perspective, Apple may act sooner.
Correct. From a privacy perspective, you would expect it, as Cadi said, to all happen in one foul swoop. But I think the ecosystem is just worth too much to them to make any drastic decisions before somebody's figured out what is going to replace a device ID. But I may be completely wrong.
Well, I'm betting that before end of 2020, Safari or Apple will move in that direction. It's not like they've cared about what the advertising industry has done with IDs in the past anyway. So I wouldn't be surprised if they took that unilateral decision. But I would be happy to pay you guys a beer when we can go out again if I'm proven wrong. So
we'll hold you to that.
yes, absolutely. Please do. Thank you very much to you too. Thank you very much to the people who joined the webcast. It was a pleasure to have that discussion. We'll have another edition with a couple of other people from the industry next week. So tune in again, and thank you for your time.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks both.